So, as I was mentioning yesterday, there is scenario one. Scenario one and scenario two. And scenario one has the idea that inspiration or strength comes from breaking out of enchantment. So you need enchantment. There it is, enchantment, or some limited worldview, and the strength comes from the breaking out of it, from the action out of it. And the reason why I thought that, inspiration was born out of enchantment was because that's where I experienced it. I was caught in enchantment, and kind of like in a perspective of pain, and as I surrendered myself to it, I kind of, it's kind of like you go along with the wave instead of against it, right? So I don't know if I've explained this on a video, but I've explained it to people that pain is resistance, right? So this is you, this is pain, this is the sensation, right? And when the sensation is trying to go one way and you resist it, that's what creates pain. It creates tension. It creates aversion. It creates conflict. Tension. It creates tension. But the sensation is just a sensation. It's just a natural sensation. It's just something that happens, right? What creates the pain, or what creates the sensation, or the perception of pain, is that you're moving against that you don't want it. If you did want it, it wouldn't be pain. It would be pleasure. But you don't want it. So the sensation can be whatever it wants to be. The fact that you're pushing against it, that's what makes the pain, right? And so I was caught in kind of like a perspective of pain. Once you submit to it, that is, instead of pushing against it, you go along with it, that pain now turns into pleasure. It turns into power, because at first you're pushing against it, but now you decide to ride along with it, and it propels you forward, actually. And so you kind of feel that. You kind of feel that when you submit yourself to it. And so that's why I thought that you need to be in some sort of enchantment. You need to be in some sort of enchantment. You need to be under some sort of idea in order for you, because you cannot submit to an idea if you don't have the idea. You cannot submit to something if you don't have enchantment. And so that's why I thought, you need the enchantment so that you can submit to it, so that you can have that energy to convert into power. If you don't have a potential for pain, you cannot have the power. So that was scenario one, right? So I experienced this power, or this adoption of power, when I was overwhelmed with the misery and with the misery and the pain of a narrative. It was a narrative that I was stuck in. I submitted to the narrative. And by submitting it, I kind of break out of it at the same time. I'm not going to bother to explain that dynamic, how that works, how to break out of it by submitting to it. But yeah. Because there's two ways to take care of this. There's two ways to take care of enchantment, as I mentioned before. So when you have enchantment, right? You have some sort of narrative, some sort of story that you're stuck in, right? There's a desire that you want, something that you want to achieve, and that you're not getting. There's a pain, whatever all this. So there's pain. There's a narrative. There's some desire. Okay, so all this is part of enchantment, right? When you're focused on something, when you're focused on a narrative, and you can't get out of it, you can't. And so there's two ways to take care of it: by dissipating it, that's ignoring it, and by dissipating it, you just let go of it, and kind of calm yourself down, kind of reason it out, maybe rationalize it, so that it no longer exists and you can safely ignore it. That's one way to do it. And the one that I've been trying to figure out, the one that I've been, the way that I've been more focused on, and dissipate is more plain. It's just kind of like building a narrative against it, kind of like rationalizing your way, as I've explained this before in another video. this in the video catching fear, catching, conquering fear. There's dissipate, and that's not by way of concave. So that's one way to take care of it. And this is useful, yes, but I avoided it, and for a long time I had no idea why I avoided it. I just noticed that I didn't give myself consolation from the misery that I was having. For me, that's what it was. I didn't know why I was doing it. Instinctually, that's just what my mind turned toward. But I went along with it. I said, you know what? I'm gonna do what I feel is right, what I feel instinctually is right. I don't want to care. I just want to go along with it. So I no longer did this. I no longer relied on rationalization to get rid of the pain, because then I found out that what I was trying to figure out is not make the energy dissipate, but kind of embody it. I'll use embody, yeah. That's what you do when you submit to the sensation, when you submit to that energy, when you submit. It's negative energy. It's only negative because you push you're against it. But once you go with it, you embody it, then energy is raw energy. It's only negative when you push against it, but when you go along with it, it's positive energy, right? The other way is embodying it. And those are two ways that you can deal with enchantment, right? So, this scenario, in scenario 1, so that's enchantment. That's how you deal with enchantment. But we're not talking about that right now. We're talking about the two scenarios of how to turn pain into power, of how to turn enchantment into power. So scenario 1 that I'm trying to figure out is you breaking out of enchantment. And so for this one, you need enchantment. You need to kind of have a narrative so that you can break out of it. But you need to have that narrative to build up the energy so that you can use that energy to turn it into power. And that's problematic because enchantment is kind of like lying to yourself, or building a narrative is kind of like limiting your reality. And to me, that's kind of like limiting your reality. It kind of goes against my own values. But I'm still playing along with this. I'm still trying to figure it out. Why? Because it's not the direction that I want to go, but I still want to explore it, just in case I learn something new. I mean, you got to be open-minded, right? Because it might turn out that this is actually the more rational option, or the better option. But in this one, but just pointing out the facts without having any opinion or value, just pointing out the facts. This one, scenario 1 depends on, it's enchantment dependent. Enchantment dependent to turn pain into power. Right? And if you don't have enchantment, you're just kind of relaxed. You don't have any energy to turn into power. You don't have any inspiration. You never do anything, right? You're just kind of relaxed. I mean, and it's chill. I guess, and I think the ideal state, you would look like a monk, right? You would just look like a monk, and a monk doesn't do anything. From the outside, that's what it looks like. I'm sure monks have a way more exciting life than what it looks like from the outside. But, I mean, just by giving it a caricature or a stereotype, without enchantment, if scenario 1 is true, the ideal state would be to have a life as boring as a monk's. That's just a caricature, though. All right, so scenario 1 is dependent on enchantment. It depends on enchantment, and that's and the problem with being enchantment dependent, another problem that it had was that you're supposed to create narratives, or you're supposed to get into situations to give you enchantment. But if you got too familiar, if you got too used to that narrative, it would kind of it's kind of like the adrenaline junkie, right? You're looking for power, and so you look for situations that'll give you that adrenaline, right? But if you get too used to that situation, or too used to those narratives, now you'll need something different and something more extreme, right? And so that was the problem with this, that the resources, if you need enchantment to create power, your resources will be limited, right? Because you can only have so many. I mean, in the span of a human life, you probably have as much narrative as you need, but or as much enchantment as you need. But like in principle, the resource of enchantment is limited. Maybe not, but for some reason, I forgot what the logic was. That was kind of another problem that scenario 1 had. All right, so for scenario 2, scenario 2 is different because in scenario 2, the thing that gives you the pain, the thing that gives you the power is not the narrative, is not the enchantment, and it's not the breaking out of it or the embodying it, but kind of the being free from it. Being free gives you power. That's what gives you the power. That's what gives you inspiration. And that kind of explains that the only reason why I felt the inspiration in here is because I was breaking out of it. Because in embodying it, I was breaking out of it. So how does this happen? How does embodying it give you power? I mean, embodying it gives you power, right? How does being free from it make you embody it? Because when I was thinking about this one, it also made sense with what I experienced, or else if it didn't make sense with what I experienced, I wouldn't have accepted it, right? Because it wouldn't make sense to the experience that I had, right? But for some reason, me embodying the pain that I was once pushing against, it let me have the power, or for some reason, it was like I was free from it. So how can I embody it and be free from it at the same time? That's kind of like the conundrum that I had here. That's why at first I didn't really trust this scenario 2. But the way it works is that the power doesn't come from you being enchanted. The power comes from the willingness to undergo or experience, willingness to experience that narrative. The power comes from the willingness, right? And so what you have here in the enchantment at first is pain, because there's the pain is created from unwillingness, and then the power is there because of willingness, right? So even in this one, even in scenario 1, this explanation makes sense, right? So it has nothing to do with the enchantment, it has to do with willingness, right? So, and the way that it plays out is that the enchantment only provides a narrative for you to practice your willingness, right? But you don't need enchantment, you don't need a limited view of the world in order to practice willingness. What you need is just views of the world. It doesn't have to be limited, right? So actually, instead of having one enchantment, instead of having one limited view of the world, the way that you gain more power is by having multiple narratives, more consideration, right? So it's not just enchantment, it's if you break free from it and you consider more realities, that's even better, because you have more narratives, a free mind, and not just a limited narrative and not a limited mind to practice your willingness on. So for example, I'm going to die in a car crash, right? That's a limited narrative. And if you believe that, you believe that, you believe that, and you're unwilling, that's what creates the pain. So, so because I'm believing it and I don't want it to happen, that creates the pain. But as soon as I say, I'm going to die in a car crash, yes, hell yes, then that puts in the willingness, and then you feel the power, right? Because now the pain that was once against you, now you feel it moving towards you. Now you feel that excitement, right? But it's not necessarily the limitations of the enchantment that create that allow you for that power. It's just the narrative by itself. So instead of, and on this one, you can break free from that narrative. You can break free from that enchantment and say, I'm going to die in a car crash, maybe. Or maybe I'm going to die eaten by a pterodactyl. Or maybe I'm not going to die in a car crash. Or maybe I'm going to get married and then get a divorce. Or maybe I'm going to live on the street for the rest of my life. And so that provides more narratives, and it doesn't matter what the narrative is. It could be you riding a horse, or it could be you having a pancake, right? But if you provide the willingness, but if it's extreme and you provide the willingness, doesn't matter what it is. And right here in this scenario, you break free from enchantment because enchantment is limited narrative. And you break free from it, so now you have this whole amalgam, this whole collection of narratives that you can practice your willingness on. So you have more power. So at the same time, so in this scenario, you break free from enchantment. You break free from limited narratives. And what does this mean? So this view that about the monk, about the boring monk, right? It's not really that. The ideal would be if you get rid of enchantment, it doesn't mean that you'll be boring, right? Because when you're boring, you have a limited narrative, but your limited narrative is safety, right? And you're enchanted in that state of safetiness, right? And so this is what most people live their life as. They live their life as, right? So they're enchanted that they need to be in safety, and that they're in safety, and that they want to be in safety, and they just live in safety their whole lives, and they never experience the world outside. So that's not actually a monk. That's actually a couch potato. Yes, and that's why they have a boring life, because they're enchanted, but it's not an enchantment that challenges them or that pushes them. It's just an enchantment that kind of like comforts them. So, but that's still enchantment. Scenario 2 is breaking free from enchantment to experience all these narratives. Depression is an enchantment against you, and then the opposite of that would be an enchantment for you. But so I'm redefining enchantment to mean limited narrative. And in scenario 2, enchantment is not an advantage. So that was October 10th. That's kind of what I figured out October 10th. And I actually elaborated more on it. I actually thought about it more as I'm explaining it right now. So there's some new stuff in here that I didn't know in October 10th. In October 15th, so let's go to October 15th.